So welcome back to Real Estate for Real People. We are so excited about today's episode. I think we're excited all the time about everyone, but this one is going to be really good.
Really fascinating. You're really going to want to listen, maybe even take some notes. So if you're driving, be careful or play this a few times because I think we're all going to learn a ton.
So we are special guest today. We've got Michael Charters from EPOC Environmental Consulting, and he is going to talk to us about lots of different things. But, buying a house can be intimidating and scary, and there's always some things that as homeowners, we need to be aware of. And before purchasing that house, we need to be aware of. So you're going to share with us some stories and we're going to kind of dive into that. But before we do, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Michael. I graduated from Simon Fraser University with an environmental sciences degree. As soon as I graduated, I was looking for a job, and EPOC Environmental Consulting in Vancouver hired me on. At that point, I had no idea what asbestos is or what kind of a threat lead poses to anybody. So this company hired me on, and we went through all the training. And 5 years later, here I am heading our new office here in the Okanagan. Yeah.
Wow, congratulations. That's amazing.
That's great. That's really good. And is it new to the Okanagan?
We've been operating in the Lower Mainland for over 28 years, and we are new to the Okanagan. We just opened last October.
Oh, wow.
And one of the things that we're really passionate about is bringing the knowledge and the tools to homeowners specifically. Because we find that in our industry, it's the big companies, the corporations that can always afford all the safety consultants that they would ever need, but it's the homeowners that get left behind, right? Or the small-time contractor that's doing a kitchen or a bathroom reno. Yeah. They're the ones that get exposed. So we're very passionate about bringing these tools and making them accessible to everybody.
Yeah. Wow.
Amazing. So what are some of the things you hear in the Okanagan? Because I'm sure it's different everywhere. So it's different than probably what it was like in Vancouver of things to watch for. So are there certain things that people should be aware of here in the Okanagan?
You know what? You'd be surprised with because asbestos is regulated on a municipal, federal, and a provincial level. The rules are all the same. As soon as you're walking into a pre-1990 home, expect that there will be some form of asbestos. It's very rare that there isn't.
Really? Wow. That common? Okay.
Yeah, very common. Now, the materials in which we find asbestos is a little different depending on the age of the home, right? So kind of your 1970s homes, you're more likely to find plaster, vermiculite, different types of linoleums and vinyl floor tiles. Whereas your homes between the kind of in the 1980 to 1990 range, we're more looking at texture coats and drywall.
Okay.
No matter what, we always test all the materials because we operate under the guideline of guilty until proven innocent.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Wow. And what does that cost?
So it's very easy with us. We charge per sample. Now, our sampling is regulated by the government, so we have to take a certain amount of samples per the amount of area that we're testing. And that comes out to $35 a sample. That's the same rate for everybody, whether you're a homeowner, a contractor, or a corporation. Mm-hmm. And then for us, it's $55 an hour for technical time, and there is no extra charges for review time or anything like that. Yeah.
Wow. So it's pretty reasonable, actually, for somebody wanting to go and have this extra step done.
Very reasonable. I was just, before arriving here, I was in an assessment where the homeowners are expanding a wing of their house. So they're going to build up a couple of bedrooms up top above the garage and convert the garage to a living room. And the whole invoice for them with all of the sampling, all of the lead testing, all of the risk assessment, which we provide for free with our reports, all of that will be about $650 for them.
Wow.
Your typical assessment, if you're familiar with the Okanagan market for something like that, you're looking between $1,200 and $1,500.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that prohibits some people from doing it. I think they just think, oh, do I really need to do it? I'm sure it's fine, right? So it's great to know that there's, a reasonable option.
Yeah, well, and with us, it's not just that we're accessible and affordable. We have 28 years of experience with what we do. We have our own laboratory. We're CALA and NVLAP certified, which is just a fancy way of saying that our laboratory is one of the best in Canada.
Wow.
And the reason why we can bring these savings to homeowners is because we do it at scale. We have a whole bunch of consultants on our team. We have senior engineers on our team. We have a very, very well-staffed laboratory. Everybody's certified, trained. I don't believe anybody in our laboratory has less than a master's of science.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we really pride ourselves on the quality of work that we do. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, we bring those savings to the homeowners directly.
So tell us about some of the stuff you find. Let's get into the juicy bits.
Well, there's or
scary bits.
There's always the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
The good is when we don't find anything. Yeah. Right. I walk in, I do my assessment, and I tell the homeowner, you know what, we didn't find any asbestos. Here are your clean results. You got a clean bill of health for your home, and go ahead and tear out what you need to tear out and do your renovation. Right. Mm-hmm. The bad is the contractors that know that they should be doing something, but they're competing against each other on their quotes.
Right.
So they'll come in and they'll say, oh, I've been doing asbestos my whole life, and don't worry about it. I know what I'm doing. Or most of the time, the homeowner is not aware, and the contractor will kind of sweep it under the rug and just do the renovation as is. And the ugly is the cases where people are exposed or hurt. So, I was recently at a house where it was a young family, I don't think they were even 30 yet, just had a 4-month-old baby. And the whole idea was that the contractor was going to gut the upstairs while they lived downstairs. And then they would move upstairs and the renovation would continue downstairs. And the husband, he had a bit of a funny feeling about what was going on, right? So he called us out to do a test. We were there that day. We were always same day service, next day report as a standard.
Wow.
Yeah, no, that's just how we do things. And the next day, I gave him the bad news that although there wasn't any asbestos, the walls were all painted with lead paint, quite high in concentration, actually. And as the fact that the contractor was dragging all this material from upstairs through their living space, the baby and the mother were breathing this lead paint in.
Wow.
And not just breathing it, but because it was on all the surfaces, the baby's around touching things, tactile
course.
surfaces, and it ended up in their system. So the baby had to go and get his blood tested. And they actually found detectable levels of lead in the mother's breast milk.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and lead is one of those things where you can get lead poisoning very quickly, especially if you're a little baby, right?
Yeah.
And of course that contractor just disappears and you can never track him down.
Yeah.
So that's the ugly side of our industry. But, because we're so proactive in what we do, we hope that we can stop it before it ever happens. Right.
What are some of the other things that people ask you to do? So we've got, lead paint that people are asking you to take samples of, asbestos, and are there other things you do?
Yeah, well, a really big one was we had a lot of work in Merritt, and because they had the failure of the sewage systems there.
Right.
So we come in and we do the mold testing, and more importantly, the E. coli testing throughout the homes, right? Because E. coli can be quite harmful to your health.
Right.
So we do those kind of assessments as well, but. We're always asked if we can do energy assessments or if we can do site assessments for pre-sales. And we really like to stick to our bread and butter. We're really good at what we do, and we don't want to start spreading ourselves too thin. So we're experts on lead, mold, air quality inside of your home, right? That means asbestos fibers post-renovation or for mold spores, E. coli testing, and doing those inspections is really where we thrive. Yeah.
Wow.
So what is something that would give you an indication that a house has mold or E. coli? Because that's something you can't really see.
Mold is one of those things that it's regulated, but it's very dependent on the person who's dealing with it. For example, I can be around mold all day, and even though I don't like the smell, it'll never affect me. Some people will have a headache within 5 minutes. And it comes down to your biology and your sensitivity. So I was recently dealing with a gentleman who has constantly had headaches, hives breaking out on his skin. It really was affecting his nervous system, it seemed. He went to all the doctors and they did all the plethora of tests and allergy tests and everything, and they couldn't quite figure out what was going on. So we came in and we did a test, and we found out that he's had elevated levels of mold spores in his house.
Wow.
That wasn't even visible. It was coming from his attic and through the HVAC system. And and he was quite frustrated. He's a very healthy gentleman too. He did all the biathlon races. He's retired now, but he's an outstanding golfer. So there's no reason to look at him and say, wow, this guy's unhealthy. But he always had these headaches, this kind of suppressed immune system almost. And we got it all cleaned out. And I chatted with him about 2 weeks ago. It's been 3 or 4 months. And he's a completely new person. He's got his energy back, his vitality back. And what happens is, when you're constantly surrounded by mold, your body's constantly fighting off those spores, right? So your immune system is always active. It's always fighting. And even though you don't notice it, your body does. It takes that toll, especially when you're older, right?
Yeah.
And that can lead to lung infections, to issues with your bloodstream, right? So that's one of those things of how does somebody know? Well, unless you can smell it or see it, it could be something as simple as when you're home, you have headaches all the time.
Yes.
And that's one of those things that we just want to eliminate right off the list. Let us come in there. We'll do an air quality test. And the reason why we do the air test is we don't have to see the mold to test the mold. We'll capture whatever's floating around in the air because mold, it reproduces and replicates by releasing spores, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the strength of what we do. We don't have to see the mold. We can capture it right from the air.
And what does a homeowner do? So I have you come over to my house, you test, and you say all the walls are painted with lead paint. What's the solution for me?
The solution is to always do it right, especially with things like lead and asbestos. Very few companies are properly trained and certified to remove asbestos and lead. There are very strict guidelines set out by the government on how to do it. There's books and regulations and pages and classes and courses that you have to take to do it correctly. When we find something like that, we recommend to the homeowner to go to one of the companies that we personally trust and vetted to come and do the work right. So I've, in my last, I guess I've been here for about 8 months. I've worked with quite a few companies here in the Okanagan, and I have a few favorites that I've never had them fail a visual inspection. I've never had them fail a clearance. I've never had them fail an air clearance. And those are the companies that I personally recommend to homeowners to use. Now, I'm sure there are other companies that are great that we just haven't had the opportunity to work with, but those are the ones that I recommend because those are the ones that I know.
So how does someone, get rid of lead paint? Like, what do you do? Do you scrape will they go in with hazmat suits and scrape the walls and then how do you do it?
Depending
Take
on
the
what
drywall off?
depending on what you're doing, because lead paint was applied on everything and anything.
Yeah.
Right. If you're in a more
Right.
industrial setting, or one of those beautiful homes that used to be back in the 1920s, an industrial storefront or something, the lead paint would have been applied on brick. In that case, you would have to chemically treat it and wash it off and scrape it away. If you're in a home where it's plaster walls, which were typically treated with lead paint, you would have to cut it out and remove it. The goal for these abatement contractors, and this is why we like the abatement contractors are certified, is they have procedures and exposure procedures that they strictly follow to make sure that the homeowner and their employees aren't exposed. So they have different, different steps to removing different types of materials. Most of the time, the best thing to do is they set up the containment, they make sure that the material is constantly kept wet so it doesn't create dust, and they come in and they cut it out, right? And then you just refinish it with new drywall that doesn't have any asbestos or lead that you can,
Yeah. Now, it is, because I know with asbestos, as long as we always are told, as long as you don't disrupt it, it's okay. As long as it stays there and you don't touch it. Is that the same with lead paint? Like in that case, it was on their walls, that young family, but it was because they were suddenly moving stuff and scraping the walls essentially that it started.
So it really becomes a threat when it becomes airborne or settled dust, right? And with asbestos specifically, is when you start inhaling it, and with lead, it's when you're inhaling or ingesting it. So that's kind of when, if you're doing any renovations or a demolition project or an abatement project or a renovation, right? You have a flood, you have to renovate your home. Pre-1990, you should get this done. Now, as far as renovations and demolitions go, the city kind of forces you to come and have an assessment done, right? Renovation companies get it done through the insurance company. The insurance company requires it done, and the city requires it for their permitting. It's the actual renovators that are going around and trying to either skirt the rules or they're unaware of the rules. They're the ones that tend to do most of the exposing, right? Most of the harm to the families that they serve and their employees.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense.
Wow.
Now, one thing that's very interesting for homeowners is, the vermiculite insulation. You may have come across that before.
Yes.
It's really nasty. It's brown. Now, that stuff was only about 0.5 to 1% of it will be asbestos, but because it's so fluffy and light, it really releases those fibers, right? So when your home settles, or if you got a really big pressure system come through, sometimes it can get quite dusty in the attic as a result of just that material being there.
Right.
I always recommend to have it removed. Now, the exposure from it being in your attic isn't going to be something to really be concerned about, but it actually increases the value of your home. When you get that paperwork that says that all the vermiculite has been removed from your attic, right? Most of the time I see that the value of the home is increased more than the cost of the work to get it done.
And how much is something like that? Do you know, roughly?
It depends. It depends on the age of the home. It depends.
Yeah.
It can even depend on little things like how big is your attic access hatch? Can they get a negative air unit to scrub the air while they're inside of the attic, or they need to build an elaborate system of containment units to make sure that the pressure is constantly kept right?
Right.
Typically for kind of your 1,200 to 1,800 square foot attic, you're looking at about $15,000 to $30,000.
Wow.
And it really, and the reason why that range is so big is it depends how your studs are up there, right?
Yeah, of
How
course.
how many of the beams, how they're all laid out? Is there a lot of room to stand or not, right? It really comes down to that. Yeah.
What about air quality test? Like that's something that would be pretty non-invasive for somebody to get done.
Yep.
Are you recommending that people go and get air quality tests on anything that's, below 1990, or what are your...
I recommend people get an air quality test if they have a reason to get an air quality test. For
Okay.
example, did you just have a contractor come in, do a bunch of work? You found out that it's pre-1990 and they didn't do any assessment. We can come in and we can do air quality test to find out if they still have those asbestos fibers floating around in your house.
Right.
Or you found some mold and you're dealing with that. We can come and do an air quality test after the mold has been removed to make sure that the levels are lower. Now with mold specifically, I like to do an air quality test before and after. because you're always going to have mold present in your home because we're just surrounded by mold. No matter time of the year, it's going to be a little less, a little more, but it's always there. But by doing that before and after, we can show you that your contractor actually did their job, right? Because
Right.
before you had all that mold floating around in your home, and afterwards you have a tenth of that, and the outside levels are higher than they are inside, then you know that your system's working properly, the ventilation's all properly filtered, and your contractor removed the mold that was producing those spores. you
Wow.
know? Yeah. Now, if you're just doing a regular, you just want to find out what's going on in your home in terms of VOCs and any of those other little parameters, I would actually recommend to have a company called Pure Air to come out and do that. They kind of do more of that, if you just want to find out what's going on, because we are consultants,
Yeah.
right? You want to call us out if there's specifically something that you're very worried about, that you have reason to be concerned about, right? And that's what I mean. Like, there's an actual chance of contamination and serious risk to your health. Yeah.
So share with us, what's the craziest story? It's probably not here if you've been here for 8 months, maybe in Vancouver, but what's the craziest thing that you came across? Or
Well, you always find weird things in people's homes, but there's,
Yeah,
there's
you
many,
do.
many of,
We can speak to that.
Yeah.
there's many of those. The craziest project I've ever dealt with was this beautiful old. It was in the 1920s. It was a storefront near the P&E. It had this beautiful brick facade on the front, and it was some kind of big merchant of goods and products way back then. They still had the hand painted signs on the brick that they kept, and they had a contractor come in to refascia the brick. So what they were doing was they were using these steam blasters to blast the paint off, and then they were going to repaint it a nice color for the people. So the front of the building had 26 units all facing the wall where they were removing that paint. And of course, being older windows with older seals, the contractor never did due diligence to find out what's going on there in terms of lead paint or asbestos. They started blasting all this, and all this lead paint made it into 26 apartments. I believe 8 of those apartments had children under the age of 10, and 3 of those children were under a year old. So
Wow.
that company got hit with a lawsuit, and I believe that project ended up costing the company $12.5 million
Wow.
Wow.
in settlements. Yeah, so that's if you're a company owner, that's definitely something you want to consider. I've been to a lot of really cool places. Under Vancouver, there's all these beautiful tunnels that were the old street level of Vancouver that then they built up and converted to the Translink tunnels where the subways now run through. So you still have these old facades of the old, storefronts, and then you just have a train running right there.
Isn't that neat?
Yeah, it's quite cool. So I've had access to some pretty amazing places, amazing laboratories, homes. I was at one home in Maple Ridge where it was a oil baron, from what I heard, from Turkey back in the 1930s. And he built this beautiful, elaborate home on 40 acres of land where he had these marble statues with little angels and all of that. And the home had all these secret tunnels and passageways because he was kind of a bit of a playboy. And one part of the home had this beautiful 1920s elevator that would, they had actually somebody would stand there cranking it to bring it up. And I wondered to myself, well, why the heck would this guy have an elevator in there? And apparently it's because Woodrow Wilson came to visit him. And they put that elevator in 1 week before he came in so that he had access for his wheelchair throughout the house.
Wow.
Yeah, so I love my work. I mean, I get to see amazing places, and I get to meet a lot of really cool people.
Wow.
So for somebody that's buying a house, is there anything that they can look for when they're walking through? I guess, is it just being aware of the age of the house and that's kind of it? Or
Be aware of the age of the house. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
If your house is pre-1990 and you're planning to do work renovating, which most people are, automatically assume that you're going to have to get that assessment done, come in and do it. Now, one thing that I want homeowners to be aware of is that your contractor is legally obligated to provide you with a pre-hazardous materials inspection before they do any work in your home.
Wow. I
That is
did not know
I
that.
didn't
That
know
is
that
a
either.
legal obligation. They cannot start cutting any of the walls, any of the drywall, nothing. They can't touch any materials without that assessment being done.
Is that new, that ruling?
That's always been the case. Now,
Wow.
that ruling comes from our body called WorkSafe BC. This body directly regulates workers and workers' health and safety. So even if you're a single contractor doing it just by yourself, you're still required to get that assessment done because you're a worker for your own company. But it also helps prevent homeowners from being exposed, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So that's one thing, that as soon as you see that 1990 and you have a guy coming in and they're going to be dropping your ceilings or scraping the texture coat or removing the tiles or whatever,
Or all of the above?
all of
Yeah.
the above, touching anything in a pre-1990 home, they have to do a pre-inspection for hazardous materials.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. And then that's your company that can do all of
Yeah,
that.
so EPOC Environmental, we do all of that. Our strength is that you give us a call today, we're there today, and you get a full report tomorrow. So you're not stuck waiting, figuring out what trades you're going to need. And that goes for both
Right.
contractors and homeowners. Now, the other thing is we use these really, really fancy X-ray machines. They kind of look like a taser gun from Star Trek or something. And we can point and shoot at any wall, any material, and find out if it is lead containing or not. We're the only company.
Wow.
We're the only company in BC that does this. Now, originally, the application of this equipment was in the mining industry because they would take soil samples and they'd find out, hey, this has lead or gold or silver or
Right.
metals in it. So we figured, well, if we take these pieces of equipment and we calibrate them a specific way, we can use it to find out lead. So we can come into your home and find out right there and then whether you're already dealing with lead, right?
Well, I like that because that was something I was going to ask is how invasive is it if you come to do an inspection on a house and take samples? What does that involve? What does the house look like?
Yeah, so asbestos testing is always going to be quote unquote destructive. Now we're very good at popping off a baseboard, going below the baseboard if we can, or in the corner of a ceiling. But no matter what, we're going to take a sample and it's going to be about 1.5 to 2 inches by 2 inches. It's going to be a
Okay.
little square. With lead, we can be non-invasive, non-destructive. But with asbestos, unfortunately, we do have to do that. Now, one industry that we really serve is realtors when they have the conditions coming up on the home, right? And I've been in these situations where the seller says, okay, you can come and do the testing. And, I always say, can you please explain to the seller that I'm going to have to cut the hole in the wall?
Yes.
And the homeowner says, well, if it has asbestos in it, I don't want it. Well, who's stuck repairing all the holes and fixing and
Right.
painting, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's something. Now, the upside to that is I recently did a home here in Mission, in Upper Mission, where the home I think was listed for $2.1 million. And of course, they got the paperwork saying all asbestos and lead has been professionally removed, yada, yada, yada. I went up into the attic, and of course, there's still vermiculite left over. All the walls had lead in it. All the trims had lead in it. It's a
Wow.
beautiful 1920s home. So of course, back in the 1920s, if you bought lead paint, you bought the highest quality of paint,
Yeah.
right?
Of course.
So we did the test and everything, and I think we had a company come out and quote the removal for everything was I think $280,000. That's before you start looking at refinishing, repainting, and everything. And
That's
actually,
just the removal.
yeah, it was a very, very big home. To be fair, that's not something that you'd ever expect
No.
to. Really, this was a unique case. But as a result of that, the seller dropped the home by the cost of the removal.
Wow.
So a $2-point-something million home suddenly went to be in like the high 1-point-something. Right.
Right.
So you can use that as a bargaining chip. I know the market's pretty hot, but I've seen it done time and time again, even with little things like vermiculite in the attic. They get a quote, give that quote to the seller. This is what it's going to cost to remove, and they slash that cost right off the home. And now you get your removal basically done for free, but you get the value of the home added and having that vermiculite removed from your attic.
For sure.
right.
And it's so nice from a realtor's perspective that you can come and do that same day and report the next day. Because of course we're always working on
Yes.
tight timelines.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I think that's a huge thing for, any realtors out there to know that you can do that. Because typically we're always waiting for everything.
And the big one for realtors too is those grow ups where people are being a little,
Yes.
Yes.
a little nasty in those basements. And we
Yeah.
come in and we do the mold testing, right? So same thing with mold testing. We take the test today, and within a day or two, you have your results. And the day or two is simply because we have to, plate the mold and
Right.
let it grow a
Right.
little bit and figure out what's going on. But again, with that kind of turnaround time, it's hard to be inconvenienced. Let's put it that way.
For
Yes.
sure. But it's so important to do. So I think it's a great step for everybody to add on to a house below 1990, or if they suspect that it had a grow up in it at some capacity.
Exactly. Yeah. And with grow ups too, they use pesticides and chemicals. So we can do that kind of testing as well. We take the surface swabs and make sure that there aren't any of those harmful chemicals, because especially with them, they probably use chemicals that are not FDA certified or approved. It can
Right.
it can wreak havoc on your reproductive system, on children's development, right? So it's one of those things that we also, if you have a grow up, just get it tested, please.
Yeah, for sure. Or suspected or what have you.
Yeah. The biggest thing is I just want homeowners to know that, these services are accessible. We're working every day to make them more and more accessible, right? We work very closely with First Nations communities because we find that they're very underserved. And because of our ability to bring those prices to them, we're their preferred vendor for this kind of thing. And and through that we can do the same thing for homeowners. Doesn't matter what your economic status is, we're here to serve you. Right? And just know your rights as a homeowner, know your rights as a worker. You have a right to refuse dangerous work. If you're a young guy, you start working for a finishing company and something doesn't sit right with you, you think you might be getting exposed, tell your manager, tell you feel uncomfortable
Yes.
with it. If he doesn't want to, listen and says, pick up your boots and keep working, you can always call WorkSafe BC and let them know, I feel like something unsafe is going on here. I didn't have an assessment done. It's a pre-1990s home. I'm working here. I'm cutting out the drywall. Nobody gave me any paperwork. You can call WorkSafe BC. They have officers dedicated 24/7 to prevent exposure from happening.
Wow.
I believe in 2019, they kept a statistic that out of all of the work-related exposure deaths, the number one cause of death in 2019 was still due to asbestos exposure.
Wow.
Wow.
Not electrocution, not falling from ladders, not car
Wow.
accidents. It's still that asbestos exposure. And the
Wow.
reason is because these guys that were in the 90s, in the 80s, in the 2000s, and even now today are going in, doing the demo, right? They're getting exposed. They're not following the rules. Most of the time is because the person who's the contractor doesn't tell his workers that they should be following the rules and tries to
Right.
kind of hide it. And, asbestos has a latency period of 15 to 40 years to really start coming up in your lungs, right?
Wow.
Mesothelioma, lung cancer, asbestosis. It takes a while for that to happen, but it's a very painful and very slow death. And if anybody knows anybody who suffered from it, they know the dangers of asbestos exposure. It's a very, very painful death. It basically, it drowns you in your lungs is what happens.
Wow.
Right. It's a dark note, right?
Yeah.
But and as far as lead goes, lead directly binds to your nervous system. What lead does is it mimics calcium in the body. So your body intakes it. It takes it directly into your bone marrow. It takes it into your bones. They used to test if you've had a lot of elevated levels of lead in your body by looking at your teeth, because it would come into your teeth, right? And
Wow.
what that does is it destroys your nervous system. So you start having Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. You become a lot more aggressive. It affects the part of your brain that regulates mood. So a lot of people who used to work in the lead industry or even in the leaded gasoline industry would be very
Yes.
aggressive, right? If you saw the crime wave kind of that started around the 1970s up until the 1990s before leaded fuel was banned, a lot of that was exposure to lead from gasoline to children, right? Because
Wow.
the school children had actually elevated levels of lead in their blood, and as a result of that, we saw these crime waves through these decades.
Wow.
lead-
Fascinating.
Yeah, lead really affects you. Asbestos affects you. Mold, it really depends on your biology, right?
Right.
But it's one of those things that just, don't play around with it. Be safe. It's not expensive to be safe. It's very expensive to be sick.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we so appreciate you being here. That's lots of information.
Yeah.
and
Really, really interesting.
Scary to know the effects of the long-term effects of some of those issues and concerns. And good to know, though, that it's preventable. Like
Very
that's the biggest
preventable.
thing.
It is very easy to prevent. And that's part of making this convenient to everybody. I hope that 2022 the causes of asbestos death will be the lowest ever, and that's what we're working towards here in BC.
Well, it's neat. Well,
Wow.
thank you for contributing to the overall community and trying to make everybody safer. So
Well, thank you for having us.
Yes. You
Thank you
bet.
for having me come out and any opportunity I get to educate homeowners, it's a blessing.
Yes. I love
well,
that.
thank you. So so thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any other questions, where can they reach you?
So our office is located downtown on Bernard, right above the H&R block. You can look us up online at EPOC Environmental Consulting, Okanagan.
Perfect.
You can always give us a call. We're available 24/7. And our company number is 250-980-6925. If you have any questions, you can text that number. We use our portal and we'll answer you directly.
That sounds amazing.
Beautiful.
Well, Michael, thank you so much. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us today.